They told my daughter to walk it off on a broken leg. That was the moment I knew they would never see her pain the way I did. Last Thanksgiving, I still clung to the illusion that we were a family, fractured, yes, but still salvageable. I thought maybe a warm meal and a few laughs could stitch us back together. This year shattered that delusion completely. The sky over my parents' house in Oregon was the color of wet slate, and the cold pressed against my jacket like a silent judgment. We had arrived that morning, Emily and I, with a modest apple pie and a forced smile. The house smelled of roasted turkey and old tension. I watched Emily skip out into the backyard. She had always loved chasing dry leaves, especially the crispy ones that crackled under her feet. At 7 years old, my daughter was bright, tender, and just a little out of sync with the world, a whisper when others shouted. The doctor had used words like mild spectrum, but to me, she was just Emily. I heard her scream before I saw her fall. By the time I rushed outside, she was clutching her leg and sobbing, curled on the patio steps. Her face was pale, twisted with pain. She just tripped, Janet called from the kitchen window. Kids fall all the time. She needs a hospital, I said, heart racing. Something's wrong. Oh, come on, Greg interjected from the living room without even looking up. You're overreacting. Again. That kid needs to toughen up. Emily whimpered as I helped her to her feet. She could barely stand, much less walk, but they were watching. My parents, my brother. The eyes that had always judged me as dramatic, fragile, unstable. I had learned to doubt my instincts, but in that moment I felt a bone-deep certainty. Still, I hesitated. I told Emily we were going to the car to get something. In the back seat, I called Chloe. "You're at your parents' place?" she asked, alarmed. "Take her to the ER. Don't wait for their permission." I didn't. I drove straight to the urgent care facility 20 minutes away, praying every red light would change faster. Emily was quiet in the back seat, eyes wide, tears clinging to her lashes. In the sterile brightness of the exam room, I held her small hand while the technician positioned her leg for x-rays. When the doctor returned, the look on his face turned my blood cold. "She has a fractured tibia," he said bluntly. "This isn't just a bruise. She should have been immobilized right away. Forcing her to walk could cause long-term damage. Why wasn't she brought in sooner?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. They said it was nothing. The word, they tasted bitter. He handed me the X-ray image. A jagged line cut across the bone, sharp and unforgiving. My fingers trembled as I traced it. Back in the car with Emily's leg in a temporary cast and her soft breathing slowed by exhaustion, I opened the patient report again. The print blurred as tears filled my eyes, but not from sadness, from fury. Because I realized this wasn't about one fall, one bone. It was about the pattern. The years of dismissal, of being told I was too sensitive, too much. Now they were treating my daughter the same way, silencing her pain, minimizing her needs. I had spent so long trying to keep the peace, but peace had a price, and Emily was the one paying it. I looked at the report again and gripped it tightly. If I didn't act, they would keep hurting her in ways that wouldn't always leave bruises. I looked at the medical report and realized if I didn't act, they would destroy her the same way they tried to destroy me. I thought silence kept the peace, but silence only let them rewrite the truth. Emily's bright pink cast rested gently on a pillow beside me, her tiny leg sticking out like a reminder no longer just of an injury, but of the 1,000 other wounds I had let fester unchallenged. It had been a week since Thanksgiving, and the house was quiet in that anxious way winter tends to be, muffling everything except the thoughts in your head. Outside, the street was dusted with frost. Inside our tiny apartment, I shuffled bills into stacks and reheated coffee for the third time. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor beside the sofa, drawing lopsided stars in a coloring book. She hadn't spoken much since the fall, but I caught her eyes watching me, always watching. The landlord's letter sat unopened on the kitchen table, its red-stamped second notice silently accusing me. Rent was due again, and the hospital copay had wiped what little we had left. Chloe called as I was folding laundry. Her voice came through the speaker like a splash of cold water. "How's she doing?" she asked. "Quiet," I answered, "but strong." There was a pause. Then she said, "You've been too quiet too, Laura. About Greg. About everything." I said nothing. "You ever double-check those papers from a few years ago?" she pressed. "You told me he stepped in to help when you were broke. You sure he didn't help himself to something I froze? You think he stole from me?" "I think Greg doesn't do anything that doesn't benefit Greg." The thought burned in my chest. I remembered the worst year of my life, Emily still a toddler, me out of work after my back injury bills piling up like snowdrifts. I was drowning, and Greg had come in like some corporate savior. He said, "Let me take care of things. Temporarily. I'll set up protections under your name." I wanted to believe it. Back then, I needed to. I pulled out a dusty file box from the top shelf of my closet. My fingers trembled as I leafed through tax forms, insurance renewals, old bank statements, many of them too neatly sorted, too official. Something didn't add up. Then the doorbell rang. Janet stood there in a camel coat holding a tin of store-bought cookies and wearing a frown that didn't match the festive packaging. "I brought these for Emily," she said flatly. "Though frankly, you've made this much bigger than it needed to be." I stood in the doorway blocking her from coming in. "She broke her leg, Mom. And children recover. You didn't have to drag her to the ER and make everyone look like monsters." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Hospitals are businesses, Laura. They're just trying to milk you for every penny." I shut the door before I said something I couldn't unsay. When Emily was asleep, I went back to the papers. One envelope caught my eye. Postmarked from Nevada. Return address a financial services firm I didn't recognize. I opened it slowly. Inside was a copy of a power of attorney form. My name, my signature, or what looked like it, was scrawled in uneven ink, but I hadn't signed it. The date just 3 days after Emily had been hospitalized for RSV, when I'd barely been conscious from stress and sleep deprivation. I held it under the lamp and felt a chill spread across my back. The notary stamp was from a bank Greg had once worked with. The mailing address wasn't mine. None of it made sense. Chloe texted just then. "Find anything?" I typed back. "Yes." A forged POA, postmarked Nevada. Seconds later, she called. "If he faked your signature, Laura, that's a felony," she said. "You need to get copies of everything. Start building your case." I looked around my apartment, small, worn, but mine, and at Emily breathing peacefully under her dinosaur print blanket. Greg hadn't just dismissed my daughter's pain. He'd been quietly manipulating my life from the shadows for years. While I struggled to stay afloat, he had taken the wheel and steered the ship however he pleased. Greg didn't just ignore Emily's suffering, he had been silently steering my life long before I ever realized it. At Christmas dinner, Greg raised his glass and toasted to family resilience. I choked on the word. The dining room gleamed with artificial cheer, twinkling lights strung across the window, pine-scented candles flickering beside a carved ham crystal glasses filled with too sweet wine. The long table crowded with family and neighbors was dressed to impress. And yet, I felt like a seat filler in someone else's show. Emily sat beside me, her legs still in a cast, her party dress stiff and uncomfortable. She tugged at the hem with anxious fingers, eyes darting to the unfamiliar faces around her. Her curls had been carefully brushed, her little shoes polished, but no amount of preparation could hide the unease in her posture. Janet greeted us with a forced smile and a too loud comment. "You could have at least brushed her hair differently. That style draws attention." I didn't answer. I was saving my strength. Greg Ever, the performer, stood at the head of the table like it was a stage. His smile was tight, performative. To his left sat Richard, nodding silently as usual. To his right was Susan Gregg's ex-wife who had shown up late and barely touched her wine. Across the table, Jenkins, their nosy neighbor, leaned toward me. "I saw your little one that day," he whispered. "In the yard. She looked real bad, screaming and all." I nodded stiffly. "She broke her tibia." "Ah," he murmured. "Kids bounce back, though." My hands curled under the table. Gregg lifted his glass. "Here's to resilience," he said with flourish. "To the strength of family bonds. To getting back up when life trips you literally." A chuckle rippled from the guests. Then his eyes found mine. "Not all of us are cut out to be parents," he added, smiling as if it were a joke. "Some just don't have that instinct." The room shifted. Some looked down. Others laughed nervously. Janet didn't speak, but her silence was louder than any laugh. She cut her ham carefully, eyes fixed on the plate like nothing had been said. Emily pressed her body into my side. I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close, shielding her from words I couldn't erase. Chloe's message buzzed in my pocket. "Found something in the public records, call me later." I stared at the screen, grateful for her even from afar. Then Gregg reached across the table. "Hey, kiddo," he said, trying to take Emily's hand. "You remember Uncle Gregg, don't you?" Emily flinched. Her fork clattered to the floor. He frowned. "Don't be rude." She whimpered and tried to slide off her chair, but the cast made it clumsy. He reached again. That's when she shouted, "No." The room froze. Gregg's hand hovered, then clenched into a fist. He hissed under his breath, "You're just as useless as your mother." Something in me snapped. For years, I'd been swallowing words, biting back shame. For years, I told myself keeping quiet was the high road. But watching Emily frightened, humiliated, trembling beside me, I knew silence was no longer an option. I stood up slowly, my voice calm but clear. "You'll pay for this. Not today. But soon." Gasps flickered through the room like sparks. Susan raised her eyebrows slightly but didn't speak. Jenkins looked away. Janet muttered my name in warning, but I didn't acknowledge her. Gregg's expression was smug, mocking, like he thought this was just another outburst he could ignore. But he was wrong. This wasn't just anger. This was the start of something. From across the table, Susan caught my eye again. Her expression had shifted, curious, almost sympathetic. She picked up her purse and left a half-full wineglass behind. Whatever was buried in my family's past, I was about to dig it up. And this time, I wouldn't be doing it alone. You can bury the truth under charm and champagne, but eventually it claws its way out. The next morning, I dropped Emily off at her school's special support center and drove straight to Chloe's place. The air was biting cold, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones and stayed there. Chloe met me at the door with a mug of coffee and a stack of manila folders. "I hope you didn't sleep," she said. "Because I've got good news and bad." We sat on her living room floor, files spread around us like a paper minefield. "Start with the bad," I muttered. "Gregg applied for disability benefits under Emily's name," she said flatly, flipping open a government PDF. "Filed during the exact month you were hospitalized after the accident. He had the documentation to prove her condition, including medical records. But you never signed anything, right?" I shook my head. "No. Never." He collected the money through a shell account, she added, tapping the screen. "It's not huge, but it's long-term. Years." I felt the heat rise in my face. It wasn't just fraud, it was exploitation. Using my daughter's neurodivergence as a tool for profit. While I was recovering in a hospital bed unaware. Chloe paused. "You still want to meet Susan?" I nodded. We met at a cafe on the edge of downtown, a quiet corner place with over-steamed lattes and scratched wooden tables. Susan looked different outside of family events. Lighter. She wore a navy peacoat and a neutral expression, but her eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. Maybe guilt? Maybe caution? "Thanks for meeting me," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "I've been meaning to." She replied, eyes not quite meeting mine. There was a long pause. Then she exhaled slowly. I know what he's capable of, she said. Greg. I mean, I stayed too long. I leaned forward. I didn't realize how deep it went until after the divorce, she continued. He took out a car loan in my name, signed the paperwork with a signature close enough to mine. The dealership never even checked. Did you press charges? I asked. She smiled bitterly. I tried, but proving intent? Nearly impossible. He said it was a miscommunication, and I couldn't prove otherwise. She reached into her purse and handed me a flash drive. These are my archived emails and scanned documents from when we were married. You might find overlap. I'm not the only one he's used. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Dr. Levine, Emily's old pediatrician. I excused myself to the sidewalk to listen. Hi, Laura, this is Dr. Levine returning your call. I checked our records, and yes, there was a visit where Emily was brought in by a male relative we assumed he had full custody at the time. It was in 2018, and you weren't listed on the consent form. My breath caught. I remembered 2018. That was during my second surgery when I couldn't walk for nearly a month. I had asked Greg to help with groceries, not this. Back inside, Susan was sipping her coffee slowly. You think you can build a case? I think I don't have a choice. That evening, while Emily rested with her favorite blanket and a cup of warm milk, I scrolled through the files on the flash drive. So many of them emails to creditors, auto-generated insurance policies, even internal memos between Greg and a former business partner revealed a man who operated in loopholes, in silence, in shadows. Then it came. An email. No name. Just the subject, she was alone. The body was short, 2019. Pediatric outpatient clinic. The girl was left in exam room B for over 4 hours. No guardian checked in. The file was altered later. I was there. No signature. No contact information. Just a ghost in my inbox confirming what I had feared. Emily hadn't just been overlooked. She had been deliberately left behind. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. This wasn't just neglect. This was cruelty masked as oversight. And now, I had a trail. I no longer doubted the pattern. This wasn't a series of accidents or oversights. It was intentional harm. And I was done pretending otherwise. The silence was never ignorance. It was convenience. Emily had fallen asleep early, curled into her blanket with her cast propped up by a pillow. Her gentle breathing was the only sound in the apartment, but inside me there was no peace, only momentum growing, tightening, sharpening. Chloe arrived around 8, a folder tucked under her arm, and determination etched on her face. I brought someone, she said, stepping aside. Mia Tran walked in, tall, precise, and composed. She wore a navy blazer and had the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to command attention. Chloe told me you need legal guidance. I'm here off the clock. But if we move forward, I'll need paperwork. I nodded and gestured toward the couch. I need more than guidance. I need to stop him. Good, Mia said calmly. Because based on what Chloe's shared, this isn't just a family dispute. It's a case of long-term psychological and financial manipulation, possibly child endangerment. I exhaled sharply. It sounded so clean when she said it, so clinical. But beneath each of those terms was a scar I'd lived with for years. I told her everything. The ER visit, the fake signatures, the disability checks, the voicemail from Dr. Levine, the anonymous email. And above all the way, my parents enabled Greg like it was a family tradition. Mia listened carefully, occasionally, jotting notes in a small leather-bound pad. She didn't interrupt, didn't blink, just listened. When did it begin? She asked. Years ago, I whispered. But I didn't see it clearly until Emily screamed in that backyard. Chloe reached over and handed Mia the flash drive Susan had given me, along with the printed documents from the benefit records. There's a pattern, Chloe said. He acts when she's vulnerable, injured, hospitalized, isolated. Mia flipped through one of the pages. This isn't just unethical, it's criminal. Fraud, forgery, emotional neglect, possibly medical negligence if he left your daughter unattended during treatment. Her eyes met mine. Do you want to fight? I want to win. She smiled slightly. Then we'll start by building a timeline. Every incident, every document, every witness. And Laura, you'll need to be ready to have your life examined from every angle. I already have, I said, by people who didn't care about the truth. So yes, I'm ready. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a standard legal form. This gives me permission to act on your behalf. It won't go public yet, but I can start preliminary work. I stared at the page. This was it. The line between surviving and reclaiming. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the pen, but I didn't hesitate. I signed. As the ink dried, Chloe leaned in. One more thing, she said. I traced the bank account. Greg set it up 3 years ago under a custodial name Emily's. He's been funneling government funds into it. You never knew because he used a different mailing address. Mia raised an eyebrow. We'll subpoena those records. And we'll need that anonymous email traced too. I'll do whatever it takes, I said. I'm done asking for permission. Mia packed up her files and stood. Then so am I. After they left, I stood by the window for a long time. Outside, the night was quiet, suburban peace, neatly trimmed lawns, fake wreaths on doors. But I wasn't fooled anymore. For years, they'd mistaken my quiet for weakness. They'd counted on my silence to shield their choices. But silence is brittle. And once it breaks, it cuts deep. I turned back toward the coffee table where the signed form lay like a declaration. I was once a victim. But from now on, I'm the plaintiff. Greg thought I'd just fade away. But I had names, dates, and something more dangerous resolve. Mia's words echoed in my mind as I stood in the fluorescent-lit corridor of the county records office. If you start this, you can't stop halfway. I wasn't halfway anymore. I was deep in it, and there was no turning around. Chloe sat beside me, her laptop open, a small portable scanner at the ready. We were waiting for the clerk to bring out the archive files. I had requested documents I hadn't known existed until a week ago. They said the authorization was signed on June 12, 2020, I murmured, flipping through my old calendar on my phone. My fingers tightened. That's 2 days after I was admitted for surgery. Chloe didn't look up. And 2 days before Greg started receiving government assistance checks for Emily. When the records clerk returned, she laid a thick folder on the desk between us. Inside were copies of legal forms bearing my name, paperwork for power of attorney medical authorization, and one I didn't recognize, a financial consent form. That's not my signature, I said quietly. The L loop was exaggerated, the A curved like Greg's writing, not mine. I pulled out my license and placed it beside the form. Even the clerk's eyebrows raised. Back at Mia's office, we scanned everything. Each document was carefully cataloged into a secure folder. Chloe triple encrypted the backup. No more misplaced files. No more giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. This next one is huge, Chloe said, pulling up a benefit database. In 2021, Greg filed for an increased disability stipend on behalf of Emily. He classified her as severely impaired, unable to perform daily functions without supervision. I felt my chest tighten. She's never been classified like that. Her therapist said she's on the mild end. She reads, writes, talks. He exaggerated her condition, Mia said flatly, to increase the payout. I nodded numbly. He used her pain for profit. We kept going. Mortgage records, tax forms. One paper caught my attention, dated late 2020, filed under my name. It was a loan application, a $15,000 home equity line of credit. I never applied for this, I said, and I didn't own property in 2020. Chloe cross-checked the routing number on the deposit confirmation. Mia's jaw clenched. The account belongs to Greg. He listed you as the borrower used your social security number and submitted it while you were recovering from surgery. I stared at the page. My legal identity, my credit, my daughter, all used like tools in his game. This isn't just fraud, Mia added. This is premeditated financial abuse, and we're going to prove it. We spent the next 3 hours organizing every piece of data. Chloe scanned and tagged the mortgage file. Mia began drafting the petition to the court outlining the forged documents, the false claims, the use of a child's medical condition for personal gain. Once we file this, she warned, Greg will know you're coming. He'll fight back. He'll deny. Maybe even spin it to your parents. Let him, I said. I've lived under their silence for too long. As we left the office that evening, my hands were full of copies, scans, and digital backups. Chloe tucked the hard drive into a fireproof case. Tomorrow, Mia said, we'll begin the formal complaint. But for now, keep everything secure and stay calm. He's not above retaliation. I nodded, but inside I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt clarity. Greg had bet on my silence, my exhaustion, my desire to keep the peace. But he didn't bet on this version of me. This wasn't about family anymore. This was forgery, exploitation, and theft. This was war. This was action. This was justice. This was no longer a family. This was impersonation, abuse, and theft. He smirked when he saw me in court. That smile cracked when I handed over the folder. The office was colder than I remembered, not from the thermostat, but from the welcome. Greg wasn't there in person, of course. Cowards rarely show up when stakes get real. Instead, I was greeted by a sleek woman in her 40s blazer, sharp as her tone. I'm Angela Marsh, representing Mr. Whitaker. I didn't bother shaking her hand. I placed the manila folder between us. This is a formal notice. I'm initiating a legal review into the misuse of my legal identity, the fraudulent signing of a power of attorney, and multiple acts of financial misrepresentation involving my daughter Emily. Angela glanced at it, expression unreadable. I see. No, you don't, I replied, voice steady. Not yet. She opened the folder. I watched her composure falter with each page, copies of Greg's forged applications, the falsified loan agreements, and finally the email from the nurse, the one that said Emily was left at a clinic for 4 hours with no guardian and no explanation. Angela didn't look up for a full minute. When she finally spoke, it was clipped. These are concerning, but you understand that family disputes. These are not family disputes, I cut in. This is fraud. This is medical neglect. And I have legal counsel. We're not requesting mediation. We're building a case. Her fingers twitched as she closed the folder. I'll speak with my client. I nodded once, then walked out before she could recover her professional smugness. Chloe and Susan were waiting across the street at the cafe. I dropped into the booth beside them, adrenaline still humming in my fingertips. Well, Chloe asked. She didn't expect the nurse's email. That one hit. I took a shaky sip of tea. She tried to play it off, but I saw it, the shift. Susan leaned in. I brought what you asked for. She handed over a thin envelope. Inside was a scanned original of Greg's application for federal assistance using Emily's name, submitted while I was bedridden, with no mention of me as her legal guardian. I kept it, Susan said. Something about it felt wrong, even back then. He told me it was just paperwork, but he was always vague when it came to money. Chloe was already organizing digital copies on her laptop. You're building weight, Laura. Piece by piece. This is what they don't expect a mother who documents everything. I leaned back. It's not just for me anymore. Chloe paused. I've been thinking you should record the next time you see him, not just for protection, but because people like Greg crack when they know they're being watched. I don't plan to meet him voluntarily. You won't need to, Susan said softly. He'll come to you. He always wants to control the narrative. I didn't want to admit she was right, but she was. Greg wouldn't let things spiral out of his hands without trying to twist them back. That evening, I tucked Emily into bed early. Her cast was off now, but she still moved with caution, like her body remembered what her mind wanted to forget. I sat at my desk organizing files until Chloe's message pinged. Backup secured. Hidden folder. Password sent to Mia, too. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. I know what you're trying to do. You think paperwork will stop me? I've got people in the courthouse. Don't forget who you're dealing with. No signature. But I didn't need one. Greg had finally decided to show his hand. A threat. A deflection. And confirmation of something I already suspected. He was scared. Good. He's starting to fear. When a man starts making threats, it means he knows you're close. The folder on my lap wasn't thick, but it might as well have been made of iron. Every page inside it chipped away at the fortress Greg had spent years building, lies laid brick by brick, and now I was holding the wrecking ball. At Mia's office, the walls were lined with case files, but today ours took center stage. She pulled her reading glasses down and gave a low whistle as she flipped through the paperwork. Forgery, medical neglect, financial abuse. You've done your homework. We've done it, I corrected her. Chloe sat beside me, tapping away at her laptop like a woman defusing a bomb. We didn't speak much that morning. We worked. Mia reviewed Jenkins's signed affidavit and attached it to the complaint like a blade on a spear. She made 3 complete packages, one for the courthouse, one for the Department of Child Welfare, and one to file under financial crimes. I handed over a copy of the email from the pediatric nurse. Emily was left alone for 4 hours without contact. Attempts to reach her mother failed because her mother wasn't listed. Mia added it to the section on neglect. Then Chloe uploaded a backup of the deleted bank records she had recovered. He thought removing the accounts would cover him, she said. But he didn't clear the cash amateur move. Each entry told its own story. Funds transferred from government disability deposits into an account solely controlled by Greg. Chloe had flagged inconsistencies in the login timestamps with IPs from across state lines. He hadn't just stolen, he'd covered it up. The silence in the room wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. That afternoon, I returned to my apartment to meet Jenkins. The man walked slowly but spoke with clarity. I ain't one to meddle, but that day I remember Emily was crying in your car. No one came out. I stood on my porch for over an hour. It wasn't right. Mia recorded his statement on the spot, typed it out, and had him sign. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. This could make a difference. He nodded, eyes lingering on me. Men like him think no one watches. They're wrong. After he left, Mia turned to me. Are you ready to file? I didn't answer with words. I picked up the pen and signed the cover letter. We walked together into the drab government building where silence buzzed louder than conversation. Mia handed the envelope to the clerk and said the words I'd waited months to hear. Official submission for civil and criminal investigation, case subject Gregory Whitaker. The woman took it, stamped it, and placed it in a tray. Just like that, it was done. We had one last stop, the Department of Social Services. There, Mia submitted copies of the financial misuse claims paired with the medical evidence. For your review and internal coordination with Child Protective Services, she told the officer. Back at home, Chloe secured the digital backups in 2 places, one in Mia's office, one encrypted in a private cloud. We were no longer collecting dust. We were moving. Then my phone buzzed. Subject: notice of acceptance, body. This message confirms the preliminary investigation of case file 6781B will begin within 7 calendar days. You may be contacted by court-appointed personnel or state representatives. I stared at it, reading it again and again. I forwarded it to Mia. Her reply was immediate. It's official. You've crossed the line from victim to plaintiff. I set my phone down, walked to the window. Across the street, a black car idled longer than it should have. My pulse jumped, but I stayed still. Maybe Greg had sent someone. maybe not. Either way, I wasn't the same woman who had sat in silence through years of dismissal. I wasn't the girl afraid of causing conflict. I had a voice now and evidence. And backing. I'm not in the shadows anymore. And this time, Greg can't rig the game like he used to. He hit back harder than I expected and lower than I imagined. The envelope came in the morning mail, thick, official, and cold as a blade, inside a court summons and a petition. Greg had filed for emergency guardianship of Emily, claimed I was emotionally unstable, unfit, and a threat to my own child. I read the document twice before I moved. The words blurred, but one line stood out with surgical precision. Evidence will be presented to demonstrate the petitioner's concern for the child's safety under the respondent's care. Petitioner, respondent. Like we weren't even people anymore, just positions in a legal war. I drove to Mia's office in a fog. She was already pacing when I arrived. Chloe sat in the corner, unusually quiet, fingers frozen above her keyboard. He moved fast, Mia muttered. Too fast. He was ready for this. They cut together footage, Chloe said, turning her screen. Clips from your living room camera? I think Emily crying, your place messy, one shot where you're on the floor with your head in your hands. That was after the ER visit, I whispered. She was in pain. I was overwhelmed. That wasn't neglect. Mia's jaw tensed. In court, context gets distorted. And he's using that. The hearing was the next day. I stood at the defendant's table with Mia. Greg sat across from us, dressed in a suit too sharp for sincerity, flanked by a lawyer who wore a grin like he'd already won. He didn't even look at me, just leaned back as if bored, confident. Then Janet took the stand. I hadn't expected her to come. But there she was, hands folded in her lap, voice calm. Laura has always been sensitive. She gets overwhelmed easily. Sometimes she exaggerates. I felt the breath leave my body. Mia didn't flinch. Ms. Whitaker, are you saying your daughter is unfit to care for her child? Janet hesitated, but not long enough. I'm saying she might need help. Maybe just for a while. Greg's lawyer pounced on the word help, twisted it into intervention, painted me as volatile, paranoid, erratic. A mother too fragile to raise a child, let alone fight a legal battle. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My fingernails dug into my palm beneath the table. When the session ended, I barely made it outside before collapsing onto the courthouse steps. Mia crouched beside me, her voice low but firm. This isn't over, but we need something undeniable. Chloe stood above us, arms crossed. This is what they do. They flip your pain into their weapon, make you doubt your own truth. I nodded, but the weight in my chest felt immovable. Greg had taken our suffering and turned it into a performance. And worst of all, it was working. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Emily was asleep beside me, breathing softly. I watched her chest rise and fall, counting each inhale as if that would anchor me. Then it came back, a moment I hadn't thought of in months. Susan and I had once stood in Greg's garage sorting boxes after their divorce. Emily had just left with Janet. I remembered the way Greg had laughed leaning against the trunk of his car, beer in hand. God, that kid. Can't stand her voice. Only reason I keep up the act is she gets me checks. Otherwise, I'd ship her off to Laura full time. I hadn't reacted then, I'd just gone still. But Susan had heard it too. She'd gone pale. She'd said nothing. And Greg, thinking no one would challenge him, had kept talking. I hate that little brat, he said. Dead weight. But she's worth a few thousand a month, so whatever. I sat up in bed. If Susan had ever recorded that conversation, and God, she might have, then everything changed. That wasn't just evidence. That was a confession. I picked up my phone, hands trembling. If Susan still has that recording, this war might end sooner than I thought. I didn't need revenge. I needed truth. The kind that echoes in a courtroom. Susan's home was quieter than I expected. A low hum of an old refrigerator filled the silence as we sat across from each other in her modest kitchen. The same hands that once signed marriage papers with Greg now hovered uncertainly over a closed laptop. She hadn't opened it yet. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I've had this file for years," she said finally. "Kept it by accident. Or maybe I didn't. I don't know." "Susan," I said softly, "you heard what he did to Emily. What he did to me. This could be the one thing that makes everything real to more than just us." She took a breath, clicked the trackpad. The screen lit up. A folder named simply Garage 2021. She double-clicked. Then we heard it. Greg's unmistakable voice slurred just enough to give him away, laughing like the truth was his little secret. "I've milked close to 20 grand off that kid," he said. "Disability this, caregiver that. Hell, she barely talks easy to play it up. Laura's too out of it to know. I did her a favor, really." I felt something between nausea and fire rise up in me. Susan closed the laptop. "I never thought I'd use it," she whispered. "But now I want to see him exposed." Mia's office felt like the war room of a legal battlefield. She listened to the recording through earbuds, her jaw clenching tighter with every second. When it ended, she removed the buds and looked me dead in the eye. "We sit on this," she said. "We don't tip our hand. This is the bullet you save for when the jury's in the room." I nodded. I trusted her. Chloe arrived just as we were finalizing the new filing packet. She carried her laptop and a grin. "I reached out to Eliza Trent," she said. "Reporter from KORV News. She did that expose on the foster care scandal last year. She's interested." Mia raised a brow. "We can't risk media coverage until the court accepts full proceedings." She knows that, Chloe replied, but she said, "If this holds water, I want the first sit-down, after the hearing opens." I should have felt fear. I'd avoided public exposure for so long, but now the idea of shedding light didn't scare me. It felt like salvation. I signed the final packet of documents. The legal complaint was complete. We were officially initiating a full investigation against Greg Whitaker for fraud, abuse of guardianship, and financial exploitation of a minor. The silence in Mia's office after the final signature was weighty. Not heavy, but electric. On the drive home, Chloe played the recording again on her phone's speaker. I didn't ask her to. She just hit play and stared straight ahead. Greg's voice returned clearer this time. "That dumb girl thinks she's a good mom," he said, followed by a dry, dismissive laugh. "She's nothing. A shell. I do what I want. Always have." I looked out the window at the town I grew up in, where everyone smiled at Greg, in the grocery store where people called him such a good brother. A man who stole years of my life, my stability, and now dared to try and steal my daughter. He didn't expect me to have allies. He didn't expect me to have a spine. But most of all, he didn't expect me to collect receipts. The next morning, a message popped up on my phone. Eliza Trent, KORV News. Her text was simple. "I've read what Chloe sent. If this is true and that recording's authentic, I want to schedule a sit-down. Your story matters." I set the phone down. My hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. I wasn't trying to protect myself from Greg. I was going to expose him to this entire damn town. There's a moment when silence breaks not with a scream, but with a truth too sharp to ignore. The courthouse looked smaller than I remembered, though it held more weight than ever. Greg once scoffed, "Even if you speak, who would believe you?" I used to wonder if he was right. Today, I would find out. Mia and I walked side by side down the cold marble corridor, her file folder tucked tight under her arm. Chloe had offered to wait outside with Emily, but even through the doors I could feel her support. I wasn't alone this time. Inside, the air was thick with tension. On the left sat a row of town locals, some I recognized, some who recognized me. To the right, I spotted Janet. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence stung more than I expected. She wasn't here for justice. She was here to see how far her daughter would fall. Greg sat smugly at his table, his lawyer whispering something into his ear that made him chuckle. That smirk, so practiced, so rehearsed, reminded me of every family dinner where I'd swallowed my pride and his lies. But today, the script had changed. The judge called the room to order. Mia stood first, voice steady. We present documentation regarding fraudulent activity conducted by Gregory Whitman under the name of my client Laura Whitman, including unauthorized loans and misappropriated child benefits. Greg scoffed audibly, leaning back with his arms crossed. You've got to be kidding me. Mia didn't flinch. She laid down document after document, loan applications signed with my forged signature, disability claims, filed during my hospitalization benefit transfers to an account I never knew existed. With each page, the smirk on Greg's face began to twitch. Your Honor. She continued, these actions were not only deceitful but orchestrated to exploit a vulnerable mother and her child. I submit as evidence an anonymous email from a former pediatric nurse confirming medical neglect, and the written testimony of Mr. Harold Jenkins, who witnessed the child in clear distress while unattended. Greg's lawyer objected to the emotional language. The judge let it stand. I rose from my chair. My hands trembled, but not from fear. Clarity burned in my chest. Your Honor, I began, locking eyes with the courtroom. For years I was told to stay quiet, that it was better for the family if I didn't make waves. But my silence cost my daughter pain, and gave this man the power to lie, not just to me, but to this system. He used my name to steal. He used her name to profit. And all the while, he smiled. Greg's laughter burst out like a reflex. Are we really doing this? She's mentally unstable, just ask anyone who knows her. I looked to Janet, hoping, begging for a flicker of recognition. She looked down. Mia didn't miss a beat. We anticipated this deflection. And we're not here to argue sentiment. We're here for facts. She clicked a button on her laptop. A recording played over the courtroom speakers. Greg's voice clear as day. As long as that little brat's breathing, I can keep pulling money from the system. The sound sucked the air from the room. Not even the judge moved. Greg went pale. I didn't need to say a word. The courtroom fell into silence, but that silence no longer protected him. You can deny words, but you can't unhear the truth once it's played on record. The courtroom was at full capacity, not a single seat empty. A different kind of silence hovered now, not the disbelieving stillness of yesterday, but something anticipatory, coiled tight like a spring. Reporters lined the back wall, some whispering into microphones. Chloe gave me a discreet thumbs up from her bench. And right beside me, Mia adjusted the speaker placement with mechanical calm. But her jaw was tense. She knew what was about to happen. Across the aisle, Greg sat upright, pretending composure, though the twitch in his fingers betrayed him. His lawyer kept glancing at the clock as if praying the time could somehow dissolve evidence. Your Honor, Mia began, voice steady but sharp. We request to play the full audio recording we referenced yesterday. It is directly relevant to the financial and custodial aspects of this case. And more importantly, it raises questions of ethical and potentially criminal conduct in relation to a minor. Greg's lawyer was on his feet before she could finish. We object. The recording was obtained outside proper consent and its authenticity is unverified. Mia didn't flinch. We have an eyewitness who can verify its context and content, and the court may decide how to weigh the evidence, but the recording should be heard. The judge considered for a long breath before giving a small nod. Proceed. Greg turned toward me, eyes wide with something between rage and fear. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You can't. Mr. Whitman, the judge cut in, voice sharp. You'll remain silent while the evidence is presented. Mia pressed play. The static crackled for a moment, then his voice filled the room thick with drunken bravado. So I told them, yeah, she's got autism real bad. Doesn't speak, cries all night. You say the right words, you get the check. Government doesn't care. They just need the right boxes ticked. Murmurs spread like ripples across the gallery. I got 3 programs running 3. And that idiot Laura thinks I'm helping her. Please. I used her name so the paperwork looks clean. She's too stupid to check anyway. Every breath I took burned in my chest. I could hear someone behind me muttering, "Oh my God." Then came the line that made my stomach turn even after hearing it 10 times already. I hate that kid. Little freak screams all day. But hey, if she keeps the money coming, let her scream. Gasps echoed across the benches. Chloe gripped the edge of her seat. I saw the court reporter stop typing, eyes frozen. Across the aisle, Greg's posture had changed completely. Gone was the cocky smirk. He was shrinking now, sinking into his chair, jaw tight. Laura? That girl's weak. She always was. Cries over everything. She won't do a damn thing. Susan stood. All heads turned. She walked to the witness stand without waiting to be called. The judge raised a brow but allowed it. State your name. Susan Whitman, she said firmly. I was Greg's wife. She looked directly at me, then back at the court. That recording was made in my house. I recorded it. I kept it because I knew someday it would matter. Greg visibly recoiled. Mia stepped beside her. Do you confirm that the voice on this recording belongs to Greg Whitman? Susan nodded without hesitation. Yes. I heard him say every word, and more. There was a rustle beside me. Janet stood. My mother, always silent, always loyal to the son she raised, was finally unable to remain still. Her lips trembled. Greg, she whispered brokenly, you did all that she didn't finish. She couldn't. The judge turned face grave. Based on the testimony, submitted documents, and the audio evidence provided, this court will formally request an independent criminal investigation into Mr. Greg Whitman for fraud, abuse of guardianship authority, and financial exploitation of a minor. The gavel struck once. Effective immediately, Mr. Whitman's access to all funds and legal decisions pertaining to Emily Whitman is suspended. Custody remains solely with Laura Whitman. Greg didn't move. He just sat there, eyes downcast, mouth sealed. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was the exact moment a predator realized he could no longer hide in plain sight. For the first time in years, I saw him bow his head. Not out of remorse, but because he finally understood. The exit was gone. I didn't need to scream. The truth had spoken loud enough. I turned to look at Emily's photograph in my phone, her gentle smile, her brave little cast from months ago. Justice wasn't finished, but it had finally begun. I stood taller. I stepped forward. Because I knew I would never be silent again. I would never let her be invisible. I would never let him win. For the first time in years, I saw him bow his head, not out of remorse, but because he knew there was no way out anymore. Justice doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes with people walking away. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, but I stood still beneath the overhang, watching Greg linger by the pillars like a man waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. People exited in small clusters, some glancing his way, others deliberately not. The silence around him was louder than the judge's gavel had ever been. Mia stood beside me, speaking softly into her phone. Chloe, a few feet away, was already uploading press scans to her drive. Susan texted, I've boxed the rest of the files. Let me know when you're ready. But it was Janet I kept glancing at. She hadn't followed Greg out. She hadn't even looked at him after the ruling, and now she was just gone. Back at home, the apartment felt strangely warm. Emily was asleep in the next room. For once, she hadn't stirred when I opened the door, just lay there, her leg curled peacefully under the blanket, a hint of the cast still visible. Then the call came. Greg. I didn't answer, but the voicemail came seconds later. His voice, raw and cracking, whispered, Mom, say something. Please. He had called Janet, not me, but Chloe had set up call forwarding on the burner phone I used for legal communications, and it caught the message by accident. And Janet? She had answered him with silence. Hours later, another message. This time from Susan. He's spiraling. Called every relative he could. No one picked up. He knows. The fallout was fast. Greg's lawyer filed notice of withdrawal. His name started trending locally, tied to tags like custody abuse, financial fraud, and mother fights back. A news outlet published a story, Single Mom Exposes Brother's Scheme to Exploit Disabled Child. The headline alone told me things had changed. But the moment that hit hardest came in an envelope. No return address. Inside a single page of lined paper folded neatly. I unfolded it cautiously. I'm ashamed. I believed every word he told us. I thought you were bitter or weak or making things up. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Signed, Ryan Walker, Greg's younger brother. The one who had once yelled at me at a Christmas dinner told me I was ungrateful. Now, he was apologizing. Greg didn't appear for the afternoon hearing, but he didn't have to. The court clerk stood before the bench reading aloud the ruling. Gregory Walker has formally withdrawn his petition. Custody and financial guardianship are hereby confirmed solely to Ms. Laura Whitman. The words echoed sharper than any accusation. There was no cheering, no grand applause, just the finality of the stamp against the folder. Janet didn't speak to me in the hallway, but when I passed her by, she didn't flinch. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her fingers trembling as they clutched her purse. I wanted to hate her, but what I felt instead was emptiness. Her silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was broken. Climbing down the steps, I saw Greg. No entourage, no suit, no smirk. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't need to. His shoulders were hunched, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The press parted for him like he wasn't even there. Just another shadow. He walked past me. Didn't speak. Didn't flinch. But those eyes, blank, bloodshot, and wide like they were staring into a future that had vanished, told me everything. He didn't say a word as he walked out of the courthouse, but those eyes, hollow and wide, told me he knew he had lost. Justice doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes with people walking away. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, but I stood still beneath the overhang, watching Greg linger by the pillars like a man waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. People exited in small clusters, some glancing his way, others deliberately not. The silence around him was louder than the judge's gavel had ever been. Mia stood beside me, speaking softly into her phone. Chloe, a few feet away, was already uploading press scans to her drive. Susan texted, "I've boxed the rest of the files. Let me know when you're ready." But it was Janet I kept glancing at. She hadn't followed Greg out. She hadn't even looked at him after the ruling. And now she was just gone. Back at home, the apartment felt strangely warm. Emily was asleep in the next room. For once, she hadn't stirred when I opened the door, just lay there, her leg curled peacefully under the blanket, a hint of the cast still visible. Then the call came. Greg. I didn't answer, but the voicemail came seconds later. His voice, raw and cracking, whispered, "Mom, say something. Please." He had called Janet, not me. But Chloe had set up call forwarding on the burner phone I used for legal communications, and it caught the message by accident. And Janet? She had answered him with silence. Hours later, another message. This time from Susan. He's spiraling. Called every relative he could. No one picked up. He knows. The fallout was fast. Greg's lawyer filed notice of withdrawal. His name started trending locally, tied to tags like custody abuse, financial fraud, and mother fights back. A news outlet published a story, Single Mom Exposes Brother's Scheme to Exploit Disabled Child. The headline alone told me things had changed. But the moment that hit hardest came in an envelope. No return address. inside a single page of lined paper folded neatly. I unfolded it cautiously. I'm ashamed. I believed every word he told us. I thought you were bitter, or weak, or making things up. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Signed Ryan Walker, Greg's younger brother. The one who had once yelled at me at a Christmas dinner told me I was ungrateful. Now, he was apologizing. Greg didn't appear for the afternoon hearing, but he didn't have to. The court clerk stood before the bench reading aloud the ruling. Gregory Walker has formally withdrawn his petition. Custody and financial guardianship are hereby confirmed solely to Ms. Laura Whitman. The words echoed sharper than any accusation. There was no cheering, no grand applause, just the finality of the stamp against the folder. Janet didn't speak to me in the hallway, but when I passed her by, she didn't flinch. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her fingers trembling as they clutched her purse. I wanted to hate her, but what I felt instead was emptiness. Her silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was broken. Climbing down the steps, I saw Greg. No entourage, no suit, no smirk. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't need to. His shoulders were hunched, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The press parted for him like he wasn't even there, just another shadow. He walked past me, didn't speak, didn't flinch. But those eyes, blank, bloodshot, and wide like they were staring into a future that had vanished, told me everything. He didn't say a word as he walked out of the courthouse, but those eyes, hollow and wide, told me he knew he had lost. After the storm, silence returned. But it was a silence I had earned. The first morning in our new apartment was quiet, but not the brittle, suffocating silence I used to live in. This one was warm, stretched out across sunlight slanting through the windows and the soft sound of Emily's feet brushing across the floor as she explored her new room. We were close to her new school now, close to the library, closer to something that felt like safety. Chloe helped us unpack. She tossed me a mug from a box labeled kitchen and grinned. This one survived the whole damn war, she said. It was the same chipped mug I used during the worst nights when I stayed up Googling legal codes and crying quietly so Emily wouldn't hear. Poetic, I said, setting it on the counter. Battle-scarred but functional. Emily sat at the table with a box of crayons and paper. She had been quiet all morning, eyes-focused fingers moving in small, deliberate motions. Then she looked up, tilted her head, and said very softly, "I don't like Uncle Greg." I froze. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Because it was the first time she'd spoken of him. Her voice, clear, small, certain, landed like a pebble in still water. Chloe's eyes filled instantly, and I could only nod. "You don't have to like him," I whispered. "You never have to pretend again." Later that week, Chloe insisted I join her at a family therapy session she'd arranged. "Even warriors need to lay down their weapons," she said. So we went, me clutching my notebook, Emily clinging to her favorite stuffed dog. The therapist, a gentle woman with patient eyes, asked few questions. Mostly she listened. Emily stayed quiet until the therapist offered her a marker and said, "Draw whatever you want." She nodded and got to work. That night, I found a letter in the mail slot. The handwriting was unmistakably Janet's. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Laura, I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't protect you, and I failed Emily. I let your brother twist the truth because it was easier to believe his lies than to face my own weakness. I can't fix what I didn't stop. But if there's still space in your life, I want to try and do right by you, both. No excuses, no defense. Just a mother asking for one more chance." I folded it slowly and placed it in my drawer. No response. Not yet. Some things needed time, not answers. At Chloe's suggestion, I submitted an op-ed to the local paper. I called it "How to Protect a Child from the Ones Closest to Them." It wasn't a story. It was a warning. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Mia read it before it went live. You don't write like a victim, she said. You write like someone who's done being silent. I am, I replied. I think Emily is too. The paper published it a week later. The response was overwhelming emails from other parents, quiet thank yous, a few invitations to speak. I declined most. I wasn't looking for a platform. I just wanted a life that didn't revolve around hiding. Back at therapy, Emily had finished her drawing. She walked over to me and placed it gently in my lap. It was a house. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small. Both smiling. Above us, a yellow sun and big swirls of blue sky. I looked closer. For the first time, she'd used color. Bright, unapologetic color. And for once, my daughter drew us with color. Bright, unapologetic color. I never needed revenge. I just needed the truth to stand unshaken. The last time I stood outside this school, Greg's words still clung to me like smoke. This isn't your place. That memory used to make my throat tighten. But now I stood on the same steps holding Emily's hand and felt only peace. The front doors opened with a soft click. It was family reading day at Emily's school, the same annual event I'd skipped last year, too ashamed, too broken. Now I wasn't hiding anymore. My goal wasn't to prove anything. It was simply to be here fully, honestly, beside my daughter. The walls were lined with construction paper decorations. Children buzzed past in a flurry of paint-streaked shirts and glittery bookmarks. A few parents looked up as we entered. I braced for whispers, but none came. Instead, a woman, one of the PTA regulars, approached. "Laura Wright," she said, then smiled. "I read your piece in the paper. Thank you for writing it. We need more voices like yours." I nodded, stunned. "Thank you," I managed. Emily tugged my hand and pulled me toward a beanbag circle in the reading nook. She picked out Harold and the purple crayon, her old favorite, and curled into my side. She didn't flinch. She didn't watch the door. She just listened. That evening, I attended the community forum downtown. It was the same hall where Greg had once won a civic award. This time, the podium was mine. The chairperson introduced me as a local advocate for family rights and child protection. I didn't flinch at the microphone. "Thank you," I began scanning the crowd. "Some of you know my story. Some of you only heard parts. But today, I'm not here as a victim or a plaintiff. I'm here as a mother." The air was quiet but not cold. Focused. I once believed silence would protect my child. I was wrong. Silence protects no one except those who hurt others. I paused. Truth, no matter how inconvenient, deserves light, even when it shakes the ground beneath us. Mia sat near the front, hands folded. Chloe stood in the back, nodding faintly. And halfway down the aisle, I saw a familiar figure, Janet. She didn't come closer. She didn't speak. But she was there, just visible. That was enough. After the forum, as people stood to leave, Emily tugged my sleeve. "Mom," she said, "can I tell my story to the other kids too?" I knelt beside her. "You can tell your story to whoever you want." She smiled. It was small, unsure, but real. Outside, the night had turned crisp. A soft golden light spilled from the library windows behind us as we walked home. Emily reached up and took my hand. I had been called weak, dramatic, unfit. But none of that mattered anymore. I was no longer reacting. I was leading. I didn't need applause. I didn't need closure wrapped in ribbons. I just needed this, a quiet walk with my daughter, no fear chasing our shadows. And if someone out there is still afraid, know this silence can be broken. And truth always echoes. After everything, there wasn't applause, just the sound of my daughter's laughter as we walked home under the streetlights. Greg lost more than a case. He lost the illusion of control, and the town finally saw him for what he truly was. Justice didn't roar. It whispered through the cracks of every forged paper, every ignored cry, until the truth stood undeniable. Like a storm breaking over dry land, delayed justice still nourishes the soul it reaches. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, like, share and comment below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you believe there's more to discuss.